It's a pleasure to be able to present Aviate's research on this investment opportunity called Enclave, as you mentioned, in Perth. Thanks to everyone for their time. There is a lot to get through, so I'll get stuck right in, and hopefully at the end we have some time for some questions. I'll try and address the questions that you have. If not, then as Paul said, they can be emailed through to me, and I'll be more than happy to come back with answers to those questions just as soon as I can. So what I would like to kind of do is I'll switch over to my presentation screen. Can everybody see that? Just a quick yes would be great. Thank you very much. So the project is called Enclave, and it's in a suburb called East Perth in WA. And I will talk. What I'm going to do is start with kind of explaining to you why we've selected this opportunity in Perth, and start talking to you about the research from a macroeconomic level. And then kind of start to filter down to the fundamentals of the economy and the property market in Perth, and why we believe it represents a very sound medium to long-term investment opportunity. And then we'll look at the site itself. I've had to split this presentation into two because I couldn't upload all the high-res pictures of the project itself, but there's also a video I'd like to show you as well on the site, and that'll give you a good kind of look at the quality and the design of the project. So let's kick off. So just a very quick little kind of expansion on Aviate from what Paul said, that we are an independent residential investment property research company, and as Paul mentioned, we've been in business since 2001, and our reputation has been built on the consistency and the depth of and the quality of our research, and our ability to identify the best projects in the suburb that we've identified as a optimal investment suburb. Our approach is very much to look for value propositions in the market around Australia, and that generally tends to mean that we take a counter-cyclical or a contrarian approach to our investment philosophy. So we look for opportunities in markets where most people are not looking, because most people tend to look for opportunities in markets that are hot. Just kind of one of those things, human mentality. So what I'll do is, so as I said, 15 years we've been in business, and and Enclave is a recent project that we'll be looking at, and Perth is kind of just now started to really emerge as a strong investment opportunity, and we are looking at the market with a very, very keen eye. A little bit about Perth. It actually is, I don't know if anyone knows, but it's the most geographically isolated capital city in the world. That does sound like it could be a detriment, but it's actually in a lot of ways, it is a bonus for Perth, considering where it's located. And I'll touch on that in a couple of slides. So what I want to do today is just kind of start with a macro market focus on Perth, then go down to have a look at a suburb focus, and the suburb being East Perth, and then we'll look at the project itself. Okay, so let's kick off. So the macro market focus for Perth. I'm not sure how familiar people are with Perth itself, or WA, but it's on the western coast of our continent, and it has in recent years been the economic powerhouse of Australia. It's essentially an export powerhouse for our country, and another kind of probably not very well known fact, but Australia just recently celebrated 26 uninterrupted years of economic growth. A feat not achieved by any other country in the OECD. We are the only country to be able to boast that, and a lot of it actually has come down to the demand for our natural resources. And WA, Western Australia, being the massive state that it is, very, very sparsely populated, essentially kind of the bottom southwest corner of WA is where most of the people live, and that's where Perth is, and the rest of it is just one big potential mine. So as you can see from this chart, this slide here, Western Australia accounts for 47% of the total value of goods exported from Australia, and that's massive. When you think about just how big this country is and how much of it is dedicated to looking for and exploiting the natural resources. The rest of Australia obviously accounts 53%, and our other big mining state is Queensland, kind of falls within that too. So that is a huge level of output for Perth. It's also been, as a result, the best performing state economy in the country. You can see in that kind of chart next to the 47-53, WA has performed at a rate of 5.3% in terms of economic growth over the past 10 years. The state per capita output is $96,000 per capita. When you compare that to the rest of the country of $68,000, it kind of really shows you just how much Perth has been responsible, or WA has been responsible for prosperity in Australia over the past few years. So I'll move on. I mentioned earlier that Perth is one of the most, the most geographically isolated capital city in the world, but the upside to where it's positioned is that it is very close to some of the world's largest economies. Perth has become a major hub for travel, freight and logistics, and WA's top trading partners are pretty much all the growth centres of Asia. In similar time zone, with plus or minus 2 hours, at 6% of the world's population, which is massive, makes trading a lot easier than for us here on the east coast. And Perth enjoys the shortest travel times of any of the Australian capitals to key markets in Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, particularly the emerging economies. That's very, very important. Something that's been able to facilitate a lot of the expansion and the growth in Perth and WA over the recent years is the redevelopment of the Perth Airport, along with a lot of other major infrastructure projects that have been drivers for growth in that state. Essentially Perth, WA, Western Australia's and Perth's geographic position and its vast natural resources means that the WA economy will have a strong international demand for many years to come, and positions it really, really well for the future. Moving on. So when we look at what kind of leads us to consider a market in a favourable light for investment purposes, one of the important things is to look at the median price for dwellings. And the median price is, and that's looking at houses, apartments or units, and how much, what it would cost you to purchase a property in a capital city. Despite all the strong economic growth in Perth and WA over the recent years, comparatively, the median price for Perth in comparison to Sydney and Melbourne is actually very, very good. If you look at the Sydney market, and I don't know how well you can make out those figures there, but I can tell you that for houses, the median price for houses in Sydney is $910,000. And for units, it's $647,000. Now, in comparison, median house prices in Perth for $535,000, and for units, $420,000. So I'm not sure how much people know, or if anything, about the recent kind of very recent history of the performance of the property market in Australia, but the eastern seaboard has been experiencing a property market boom, in particular Sydney and Melbourne, to a lesser degree Brisbane, which is why it's also a city that we're active in, because it hasn't been going ahead in leaps and bounds like Sydney and Melbourne. But the 2 years of boom that's been experienced in the Sydney and Melbourne markets has led to very substantial increases in the median price of property, which for us means that those high median house prices like that kind of start to make a market undesirable for investment purposes, particularly if you want to look at value propositions and getting in at or near the bottom of the market or in the upswing phase of the market rather than buying at the peak. If we look at kind of the performance of the various capital city markets in Australia, focus on Perth, and I don't know if everyone can see my mouse pointer there, but year-to-date change for Perth has actually gone backwards, 3.9%. Annual change has been minus 3.4%. And when you compare that to Sydney, double digits, 11.9% and 11.6%, that's quite a difference. Now, that is, a lot of that is driven by, there's a number of reasons, things that have driven the Sydney and Melbourne market, but I'll focus on the Perth market and why it has actually kind of gone backwards in comparison to the Sydney and Melbourne market. Essentially, the reason for Perth, the performance of the Perth property market, is that the economy there is in transition phase. It has gone from booming as a result of the mining boom, and as the mining boom has ended officially, we're in a different phase now of the WA economy. The mining boom kind of resulted in an enormous amount of demand for property in Perth, and we saw huge rises in property prices in Perth. A lot of people made a lot of money in a very short space of time. That's no longer the case, and for the past couple of years, while Sydney and Melbourne have been going through the roof, Perth has been going in the other direction. But that's pretty much at an end in terms of the underperformance of the property market, and we believe as a company that if Perth hasn't reached the bottom, then it's kind of very well near there, and which is why we are very seriously looking at Perth. We will be looking at Perth as an investment market from this point forward. So just bear with me for a sec. So when we're looking at median dwelling prices, it's also important to look at rental returns, rental yields. Now this next slide, and again, apologies if it doesn't come across too clearly, but again, I'll focus on Perth. And we're looking at yields as a percentage. Currently, Perth is at the 4% mark. So as an investor, if you're investing in a property in Perth, you can expect around about a 4% yield. 12 months ago, that was around 4.2. So just a slight, it's only kind of come off slightly. If we look at the markets that have been booming, Sydney and Melbourne, the yields are lower, 3.5% currently for Sydney, and haven't come off from 3.9% 12 months prior to that. 3.3 for Melbourne, and 12 months prior to that, 3.5. So as an investor, you've got to, or as a group, we think to ourselves, well, median prices for Perth are substantially lower, and yields are fairly buoyant. So they are two big fundamentals when it comes to looking at the appropriateness of putting investors into a property market. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So is everyone, just want to kind of do a bit of a check. Everyone can hear me? Everyone, it's coming through clearly? Excellent, okay. So I mentioned that Perth is actually in a transition phase with its economy. It's gone from investing enormously into the resource sector. That has now, as I said, the mining boom has come to an end, and the new phase of the mining, or I guess hopefully the new mining part of the new mining boom will be the construction phase. Now Perth and WA as a whole will benefit from an enormous amount of infrastructure spending, and these are some of the projects that have been completed and are currently underway in Perth. The second one in particular is a stadium that is just right across the river from the Enclave project, and I'll flick back to the very first slide and show you just exactly what I mean. Where it says here in blue, Enclave East Perth, that is the position of the project itself, as you can see here in the background of the central business district of Perth. And this will be what the new stadium looks like. It's a $1 billion stadium, 66,000 seat capacity, and it'll be of a world standard, and it'll attract international fixtures for football, Australian rules as it's played here, and cricket. And with a new purpose-built bridge that'll allow for access from people from East Perth right over to the stadium. So things like this, these kinds of projects is it's currently what's driving Perth forward, and will secure the economic future for Perth over the next few years, until we hope the next phase of the mining boom really kicks in. So essentially what this means is for investors is an opportunity to get into Perth at the low point of the market, to get in at a low medium price, at a point where yields are still fairly buoyant, but to ride the growth over the next few years, and essentially what will happen, again, human mentality being what it is, when the market in Perth starts to take off, that's when people from the eastern states will really actively look to be purchasing in Perth. It's just what people do. They want to get into the market that performs best. And Perth is uniquely positioned because all the other states in the country are performing, achieving positive rates of return, whereas Perth is not. So that is the overarching opportunity for Perth, getting in at the bottom and riding the growth and the movement from the bottom of the phase of the property cycle into the upswing phase and towards the peak phase. How many years that takes to achieve is up for debate, but again, the opportunity is to get in at the bottom of the market. So a lot of projects going in and around the city. Another one is Elizabeth Quay, which is again very close to the project. That is kind of underway. Brand new freeways that connect the city to the airport and other major arterials, and also new transport links. The city is undergoing an enormous amount of change. The next thing that I want to look at, and it's also very important when looking at the viability of a city for investment purposes, is population growth. Are people moving there, and to what degree? And again, apologies kind of for the small font. We're having some issues in getting the proper size and the proper size fonts on the presentation. For some reason, the program took everything and kind of changed the fonts and changed the size, so we had to kind of just try and snapshot it at this size for it to work. But Western Australia accounts for 11% of the total population of Australia, and between March 2007 and December 2014, it was the fastest growing state, very much driven by the mining boom. Greater Perth had an estimated resident population of just over 2 million, and as I mentioned before, most of the people in WA actually live in and around Perth. So 79% of people, the population of Western Australia itself, is in Greater Perth. And Greater Perth itself is expected to increase by just under 50,000 people per annum between 2016 and 2021. So an annual growth rate of 2.2. Comparison, the Australian growth rate is around about 1.3 to 1.6% per annum. So a big statistic here is that the Australian Bureau of Statistics projects that Perth's population will outnumber that of Brisbane from 2028. Brisbane currently is our third largest city. That would make Perth Australia's third most populous city. So very much on track to achieve that. So I'll just move on. And all this information will be available to you, the slides after the presentation. Again, if you can't see some of the numbers well, you'll be able to once you receive the slides. Again, I'll have to apologise. This is a slightly kind of blurrier one, but just bear with me. What I want to demonstrate to you is down here at the bottom, the forecasts for Perth, the growth of Perth between 2011 and 2031. The population is expected to grow from just over 1.8 million to 3.2 million. That is an increase of 1.4 million people, or in percentage terms, 77.2%. And when we look at the rest of the country, how Perth stacks up, it is more than double the next highest, which is Brisbane, at 48.6% increase in population. That is extraordinary. So again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. This is an opportunity to get into Perth as a medium to long-term option, and really ride the growth that is coming. Oops, it's disappeared. What's happened there? Someone's pressed something. Dan and Paul, my presentation screen has disappeared. Can somebody... Oh, thank you. Okay, so next slide. Just as important as the population growth is the actual shift in the demographics of a city. This is something that we look very, very closely at, because whilst it's important to identify a strong suburb to invest in, you want to make sure that the people living in that suburb represent the safest and securest tenant demographic possible. because not only is there a capital risk to property investment, but there's a tenancy risk as well. You want to make sure that your product will be in demand for the strongest and the most prosperous demographic. Now, when we look at WA in terms of shifting demographics, the strongest growth in age groups will be from people over 55, and then after that from people between 25 and 34 years of age, to a degree of 17%. These two age groups have the highest propensity to live in apartments. Senior people at retirement age downsizing, looking at very high quality, high standard 2 to 3 bedroom apartments close to all the amenity, going from large houses to nice large high quality apartments, as I said, and young professionals, upwardly mobile, high income earners, working in industries where there is a lot of stability and a lot of growth, and growth industries of the future. Now, to that extent, that's where we're seeing Perth, WA, and Perth will see a lot of the growth in those two age groups, which is actually just from an investment perspective, fantastic. A little bit more in terms of the shifting demographics. 24% of Perth's population looking at is Gen Y. As I said, this is the generation that wants everything now and everything fast and everything to be of a particular standard. It's the me generation, and they are willing to pay for it. They, as I said, we look at suburbs where there is a large degree of white-collar professionals earning very strong incomes, and I'll touch on those in the next few slides. There is a large degree of immigration as well into WA, and particularly into Perth. 60% of immigrants to WA are aged between 20 and 34 years, and many of those with university qualifications looking at getting into the growth industries and a lot of the resource jobs that are available in WA. 23% of Perth's population are baby boomers. They're transitioning from full-time employment and have a preference for low maintenance dwellings. Empty nesters, people who don't need a 4-bedroom house any longer, who would be more than comfortable in a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment with all the amenity at their fingertips, proximity to everything that they need, and being able to kind of downsize and put a fair bit of money from the sale of their larger property into their pocket to fund, to a degree, their retirement. Okay. In terms of looking at what's going to drive the growth in WA, there is an enormous amount of investment in the state itself, and again, largely driven by the abundance of minerals and resources. Western Australia was home to 513 mineral projects with 1,050 operating mine sites, producing more than 50 different commodities, more than any other state in the country. Perth is home to 35% of the companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, which collectively account for the largest proportion of Australian mining companies in Africa, South America, and Central Asia. And this is a stat that I found most interesting, is that Australia is set to surpass Qatar to become the world's largest LNG exporter by 2008, not too far away. And Western Australia will represent approximately 57% of the national production. That is a massive, massive industry and a big boon for the state. 6 of the top 7 international energy companies around the world base their regional head offices in Perth. There is a statistic for the Queensland market, and I'm sure if I kind of dug up the stat, it'd be similar. But for every job created in a mine in Queensland, there are 18 support or related jobs created in Brisbane in the Central Business District. High-paying professional jobs, and it would be, if not the exact same percentage, and very similar for Perth. And international companies are recognising just how big of an opportunity Perth is, and as you see there, 6 of the top 7, their head offices are in Perth. Okay, moving on to the next thing, just to kind of further prove the amount of infrastructure spending that's going on in WA, and it's going to drive the economy forward, and therefore also the property market with it. Massive, massive infrastructure projects happening in WA from international companies. One, Gorgon, a $55 billion project, and another one called Wheatstone, a $29 billion project, which will result in thousands of jobs, increased revenue for the state government, a greater level of demand for goods and services in the state, and a return to the days where we saw an enormous amount of economic activity and output from our western state. Having said all that, surprisingly, mining is not the biggest employer in WA. That honour falls to healthcare. Employs 157,000 people, or just over 11% of the workforce. Only 7% of the workforce actually works in mining. So despite the fact that the mining boom has ended, people kind of tend to think that Perth's fortunes rise and fall completely with the mining boom. That's not the case. It does have an impact, obviously, but in terms of employment, it only accounts for 7% of the workforce. So a very well diversified economy. When the mining boom ends, there are other sectors there to pick up and keep the economy moving forward. In terms of where the new jobs will be, the next infographic over kind of gives some numbers there in terms of where the jobs will likely to be: healthcare and social assistance, and construction being, and also education and training. A lot of foreign students, particularly from South Africa and Asia, full fee paying students. That is a big sector for the WA economy. Okay, so let's now have a look at East Perth itself, a bit of a focus on the suburb itself. So as I mentioned earlier, that this is East Perth. This it's pretty much it's actually in one, probably the best positioned suburb in Perth in terms of proximity to the CBD and large infrastructure projects. Access into the city is by public transport, by the ability to walk, road access, sporting grounds. There is a casino that just kind of off here that you can't see that's being redeveloped, and one of the big kind of drivers of prosperity, whether you love it or hate it, casinos do create many jobs. They bring a lot of international people over who spend a lot of money, and it is a great driver of economic activity for a city. So East Perth, his enclave position right there where the mouse pointer is, it is in a wonderful position, and it is actually quite an affluent suburb. Moving on to the next, so this is kind of, again, where my mouse is kind of pointing is essentially the border of East Perth, and that there is Perth CBD itself. It's about 2.3 kilometres drive from the project to the CBD, and takes about 18 minutes by bus if you wanted to go by public transport. In terms of the demographics for East Perth itself, not Perth as a whole, but East Perth, 45% of residents are aged between 20 to 34, so quite a young population. Particularly when you compare that to Greater Perth, it's double. Lone person households are very important because this tells you who your likely tenant will be, or who the likely tenant will be for the investment property. 39% are lone person households, or single occupants. The next highest would be for dual occupants with no kids, and that is increasingly where Australia is headed. Lone person occupancy and dual income with no kids occupants will make up the vast majority of households in Australia between now and 2030. And those people are increasingly looking for high quality housing with very close proximity to the CBD, but not actually in the CBD. So areas like East Perth will have experienced high levels of demand from those demographics. So just kind of moving on to, when you look at a big stat here is 81% of East Perth residents are considered white-collar workforce or white-collar professionals. That's huge, and very strong incomes. So, and if we look here, the average annual household income for residents of East Perth is, in Australian dollars, 108,257,000. I'm not sure what that comes to in pounds, so if someone wants to do the numbers and type it into the chat field, that would be great. If not, maybe we can kind of do it afterwards. But the average annual household income in Australia is around about the $72,000 mark. So that is an extraordinary number there, and it shows you the affluence of East Perth. And also, very importantly, their ability to actually be able to afford rent for a high quality, high standard investment property or housing. suburbs characterised by a high proportion of residents who are aged between 20 and 34, as I mentioned earlier, almost 50%, and 61% of them actually rent their accommodation. The great Australian dream of owning your own house is fastly becoming less and less of a reality for a very large portion of the population due to house prices all around the country. The Sydney market is one of the most expensive markets in the world, if not the most expensive in the English-speaking world. It's definitely one of the most expensive in the OECD, right up there with London and Tokyo. So people on very high incomes are more finding that renting where they want to live and investing elsewhere is the way to go, and it's the way to get into the property market, which is why they are able to, and they are looking more and more to a much larger degree at areas like East Perth and at projects to the standard and to the quality of Enclave. So the actual population of East Perth is forecast to increase by around 18,600 new residents between 2011 and 2036. So we're going to drive the demand for housing in Perth. So it'll become a case of quality. What stands out as the highest quality? Are people going to want to live in high density housing or medium density housing to a higher standard? The average annual population growth is 5.5 is expected in between 2011 and 2021. Again, when you consider that the average the population growth rate for Australia as a whole is 1.3 to 1.6%, that's quite a healthy population rate. In terms of the kinds of jobs that people are doing, this slide talks a little bit about that. The residents of East working predominantly in Perth's central business district, in healthcare, and also in construction jobs. Very, very high-paying construction jobs. Back during the mining boom, it wasn't unusual for someone working as a chef or a cook at a mine site to be earning $100,000 plus. That is the kind of incomes that people in Perth became used to, and East Perth has a high degree of very high income earners. In terms of East Perth incomes, East Perth's income distribution indicates that high proportions of residents in top tier brackets, with 9.9% earning between 1,500 and 2,000 Australian dollars per week, and 16.8% earning over $2,000 per week. This can, as I mentioned, can be credited to a high proportion of professional residents. 52% of the employed people there classified as professionals and managers. Now that's important from the perspective of security of tenancy. As an investor, what you want to be able to achieve is a secure, stable tenant who will choose to be there for the long term. You don't want to have a high turnover of tenant. It is a drag on cash flow, and what keeps high income earning tenants in an apartment is quality fixtures, quality design, quality layouts, ample storage, views, low to medium density projects where they can experience the quality and the design, and they can take advantage of that, but also have all the proximity. Quality is becoming the biggest determining factor for tenants. They are spoiled for choice, and there is very much a flight to quality in the Australian market. And smart vendors, such as the vendors of this project, know that, and they go the extra mile to provide amenity in order to attract those kinds of tenants. Another thing that we look at, and I'll touch on fairly briefly in the next slide, is probably the most important thing to look at is supply of stock in a particular suburb that we are scrutinising, but not just in that suburb itself, but also the surrounding suburbs. And it's extremely important because supply risk is probably the biggest risk that an investor in property faces. It has a dampening or a negative effect on capital prices if there is more supply than demand, and the same can be said for rental incomes as well. If there is more properties available and there are people looking, then rental income takes a hit. So it's very important for us to know what is happening in the suburb that we are looking at now, but also when the project itself completes, and what position is that suburb likely to find itself in from a supply perspective. If we know the demand side in terms of population increase and who's moving into the suburb and what kind of incomes they're earning, what kind of jobs they're doing, and then we know what the supply side is, we can be very confident about the demand-supply relationship for that particular suburb. So, and what we make known to our clients, and in the full report that will be available to you, is the supply numbers for East Perth. Talking about tenancy, vacancy rates is what we here refer to. It is the relationship between properties that are available and people who are looking to rent. Anywhere up to 4% is considered an equal market or equilibrium, where there is an equal number of properties available for the number of people who are looking. Now, at this point in time, well, as of June 2016, the vacancy rate in East Perth was 8.5%. Now, that's high. So what that means is that there are more properties available than what there are people looking. Now, that is up for the month of June 2016. Now, we are confident that between now and when this project completes, that figure will actually moderate and come down. What this graph doesn't tell you, however, is the difference between the vacancy rate for established properties, so something built prior to 2012, and new properties, so new properties that have hit the market. And what I can tell you, and the trend right around Australia, is that new properties have vastly lower vacancy rates, and they are snapped up much faster than established properties because they tend to be better designed, better built, everything is new, and there is greater amenity in the newer projects because, as I mentioned, apartment buildings in Australia are getting better and better and offering a lot more. So that vacancy rate, I'll be more than confident to say that a large part of that vacancy reflects established properties in East Perth. What we also know to be fact is that new properties achieve a rental premium over established properties. But let me just kind of take, before I get to that, to talk to you about East Perth itself and what kind of rental returns it attracts in comparison to the city of Perth itself, so the Central Business District, and Metropolitan Perth, or Greater Perth. So not by a huge amount, but East Perth, the median for rent, and that's new and established, is $550 per week compared to $540 for the CBD area of Perth. As I mentioned, rental premium. This next slide talks about what a new project will attract over an established project. And in the red there is what a new project or a new property achieves on average for a one bed. As you can see here, a new property in East Perth, a one bedroom apartment will attract around about $450 per week compared to $430 per week for an established property. If we look at a two bedroom property, that increases to $650 per week compared to $545 per week for an established two bedroom apartment. And the gulf is even bigger when we're looking at three bedroom apartments. So not only is the vacancy rate lower for new properties, but the rental return achieved is much higher as well. And that's obviously important for an investor because it makes owning the property less arduous from a cash flow perspective. Okay, now in terms of looking at East Perth, during WA's the mining boom, inner city rents rose considerably, driven by strong corporate demand. Now, I don't know if anyone has heard of fly in, fly out, but because of the nature of the work and the lack of people available in WA to do it, a lot of people flew in from other states and other countries. I knew of people who flew in from New Zealand on a weekly basis. They would fly in, work 10 days straight, fly home for 10 days, and then repeat. And they were so that kind of work drove a lot of demand for rental accommodation in Perth. And one of the reasons why there is an increase in vacancies is because that is no longer really happening because the mining boom has come off. But once that changes again, you'll see increased demand for rental accommodation in and around the CBD of Perth, which is where the vast majority of jobs growth will occur. So that again places East Perth in a very, very strong position to capitalise on that from a demand perspective. Okay, that pretty much brings me to an end on the research side. What I want to do now is play you a 3-minute video of the project itself. This has been put together by the vendor, and I will flip over. I'll play it for a couple of seconds. Just let me know if you can hear that. Can everyone just do a yes or a no? Okay, all right, I'll let it continue playing.
You're the one keep on working. You can see that the dreams are calling back the things, and they want to share things, but I keep on working. Oh, you're the one keep on working. See that the dreams are calling back the things, and they want to share things, but I keep on working. Oh, you're the one keep on working.
So hopefully that gave you a good indication of the location of the project itself, a little bit of overlap at Perth, some site views, elevation views. I'll flick through a couple of other pictures that I have for you that some of which will be were in the video, and you can YouTube that video. It's just Enclave East Perth. So there is a rooftop dining area, communal area, which is available to all the residents, with a lounge area and a TV screen with expansive views, so 360-degree views of Perth. That is available to everyone, for everyone to use. This is another angle of the project, of the rooftop area. And another, so very high standard, a lot of attention to detail in terms of the architectural pieces and design pieces, you know, really in keeping in mind that this is in terms of the climate and having big open spaces where people can enjoy the outdoors. You know, Perth has wonderful weather, an exercise area, communal gym. An internal shot of the kitchen. Now there are different colour schemes. This is the light scheme. As you can see, quite light colours, lots of white and creams. Double-sided kitchens, large bench preparation areas, high quality finishes, and drop-down pendant lighting. If we look at the dark colour scheme, so a contrast to, you know, in terms of between the dark and the light, very chic, very modern. And this is what, you know, affluent tenants or high income earning tenants, this is the standard they demand. And smart vendors, as I mentioned, reputable vendors, they meet the demand of the market. So this is just some bathroom shots. So as you can see, ample storage, which is a big thing that tenants want. They require a lot of storage space. So no kind of skimping in terms of tiling and storage and recessed lighting, all these kind of things that make the difference. Floor to ceiling windows, great ceiling height, 2.7 metre ceiling height, so it gives a feeling of abundance of space and lots of light. The west aspect here is the aspect with the city views, just so you know. And just another kind of medium scheme in terms of some softer colours in between the light and the dark. So if I just flick back to I'll just kind of run you through very quickly in terms of just the different levels of floor plates. As I said, the west aspect is the city views, the south is the river views, and north and east are district views. I haven't attached floor plans for a couple of reasons. One, I know that the gentleman at OPP can provide them to you by email, I believe. The other reason was the file was just too big for me to be able to upload to this program. It didn't allow me to upload. There was a limit on the file size, so I had to cut something out, and unfortunately the floor plans were it. But as I said, they are available if you want to request those. The floor plates, this just kind of shows you the lower ground and the upper ground, you know, parking. This is the first floor, and just the spread of the apartments. Now there are 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 1-bedroom apartments in this project. Most of the units are 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, signifying that is where the demand is strongest. So similar floor plates across the different levels, and again, sorry, it comes across a little bit small, but as I said, you can get individual floor plans. There is an allocation of stock in this project that has been assigned for sale, exclusively for the OPP and related businesses, and that can be made available to you by the gentleman again at OPP. And this just shows the rooftop area. That brings me to the end of what I want to talk about. So I might just kind of flick back to either Dan or Paul. I'll switch my audio off, and maybe just if you want to let me know, do we have some time